This is Standard Office Procedures, the podcast that helps professionals live and grow through culture, communication, and candor. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Standard Office Procedures podcast. I'm your host, Grace, and here with me in the studio is my co-host, Shannon. Say hi, Shannon.
Hello. What are you laughing at?
I don't know. I'm just happy that you're here. And I'm also laughing because I'm a little bit uncomfortable. Because our topic today, I made the joke to Shannon beforehand. I do not know that we are the most qualified people to be talking about this.
Definitely not.
Shannon and I, if you could not already tell, are two Caucasian ladies. And my worldview is pretty limited, I'd say. I've lived a lot of places, but I still have a middle-class white person view of the world. But Shannon and I are the ones who are here, so we're going to be talking about microaggressions.
All right.
Specifically in the workplace.
I mean, I think that we have both experienced microaggressions in terms of age and in terms of gender.
Yep.
But that's it.
That's it. Exactly. So microaggressions.
Oh, and I also have in terms of weight.
Okay, that's a good one too. That's a good point to bring up. So microaggressions are a lot of things, right? And I'm sure we've all heard the term microaggressions. It became like kind of a buzzy word in the last couple of years, but I think now has really entered the kind of lexicon of mental health and, just talking about general like social injustice and things. And so I think it's a really important topic to cover. Like I said, when Shannon said, "Why are you laughing?" I think it's really important, and I don't mean to make light of it. I do sometimes, though, just like I think most people, right? When you're trying to talk about something that's a little bit outside of your purview, I feel like I hope I don't misrepresent it.
Yes.
Or, downplay it or not understand the gravity of it.
Yes.
So if at any point in this podcast, know that I'm doing my best. I'm not going to get it 100% right.
I think all we can do is talk about it from what we know as far as facts go and what we know as far as our own experiences go.
Yes.
And that's it.
So keep in mind that is the lens. Again, that's our demographic and that's what we've got. So bear with us. So, all right, let's talk about microaggressions at work. So what exactly is a microaggression? So I have a standard definition that I think is from the Oxford Dictionary that says a microaggression is a statement, action, or incident regarded as an instance of indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group, such as a racial or ethnic minority, right? So that's the very textbook definition. Mm-hmm. But what does that mean? So in other words, a microaggression is a term used to describe just basic everyday verbal or behavioral or environmental insults that whether they're intentional or not, they communicate negative or derogatory or sometimes just straight up hostile attitudes towards culturally marginalized or stigmatized groups. So oftentimes a microaggression, it's called a microaggression because it's not something that's straight up in your face. It's not saying something like a slur or something just outright. It's something that oftentimes you might not even realize that you're doing it.
Yes.
You don't even know you're being potentially offensive.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things, it's very easy to laugh off if somebody says, was that, I don't know if that was right. I don't think that was a good thing to do or to say for somebody to be like, oh, it doesn't mean anything. Oh, I was just kidding. Or, oh, well, and it's very, it's one of those things where if something gravely wrong happens to a person by another person, for them to stand up for themselves or for somebody to stand up for them as saying, hey, that was wrong. Mm-hmm. Microaggressions are trickier because it's so easy for people to ignore them, brush them under the rug, say, oh, I was just kidding, or, oh, I didn't mean anything by it, because again, like Grace said, a lot of times people don't know that they're doing it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people definitely know that they're doing it. But I think this is an important topic for us to talk about because I think we are probably going to talk more about people that don't know that they're doing it. Yes. And maybe you're somebody that does this or has done this. I have done it.
I have too.
I have done it recently. And it's like,
don't mean to do it.
Sometimes I don't mean to do it and I don't know I did it. Sometimes like the other day I did this to somebody and it slipped out and I was like, oh no, the second I said it, I was like, oh, that was bad.
Yeah. So I'm glad that you brought that up because I do think it's important for us to kind of say that from the jump is that I think that sometimes with issues of sort of sensitive topics like racial injustice or, sexism or any kind of ism really, if you are feeling like you might be being accused of it, it's very natural for you to get very defensive very quickly and be like, oh, I didn't mean to, or, that's not me, or I wouldn't do that. And I just want to say, please keep an open mind as you're listening to this because we've all done it. I've done it. Like Shannon said, you did it recently without meaning to. I've done it recently and kicked myself for it because, and I'll kind of get into that in a moment. But I want to go back to what you said that was really important, just kind of defining what a microaggression is and how it kind of manifests. And we're going to talk specifically from the professional workplace lens. But this can happen all over the place. Yeah. But essentially what happens a lot of the time is that response that you said where it's, you say something, you didn't mean it to be offensive. You're trying to be funny or you're trying to connect or you're trying to whatever. and it's not met well, and you go, oh, I didn't mean it like that, or like, oh, I was just kidding, it's, and not you maybe, but that's how oftentimes microaggressions, when they're pointed out, are responded to with like you downplay it, you go, I didn't mean it like that, or that's not what I meant, or you're being too sensitive, I think is one that is now kind of, that's a response that's kind of going on the outs. I know Shannon, you mentioned a moment ago that we've both experienced it due to a couple factors, age, sex, all kinds of things. And that's funny. I had a conversation with my little brother recently, and he said that he thought that maybe I was a little bit hypersensitive to sexism. Like I tended to see it where it wasn't. And I don't know if that's true or not. All I know is that he's a guy, and you and I have talked before about how oftentimes we'll tell the men in our lives, like, oh yeah, this happens to me all the time, or oh, this happened to me. And they're like, does that really happen?
Yeah.
Are you serious? Really? That happened? Are you sure he meant it like that?
Yeah.
And I'm like, you have no idea what it's like to be a woman. And so from that lens, again, like I have no idea what it's like to be like a racial minority in America, right? So there's all kinds of things that people might inadvertently be like, oh, you're being too sensitive, or, and their intentions are good, but it's a little frustrating when I'm saying, like, I'm kind of going in like little tangents here, but I think
it's hard to talk about.
It's hard to talk about, but also the example that I keep thinking of is like that I would do when I worked. So I worked at a place. Have you ever heard the phrase restaurant? No. I've never heard that. Like people call Hooters.
Is that like Hooters?
Yeah, it's like Hooters in Twin Peaks. And so I worked at Hooters for a while in college. And of course, you work at Hooters. I knew what I was getting into. I can't get upset every time somebody makes a comment. But I would have a threshold, right? Where it's like, if you started to insult my intelligence because I was a waitress at Hooters, I'd be like, okay. And I would always go, they'd make a joke, right? About me being dumb. That was the punchline. And I would look them in the eyes and I go, why is that funny? I don't get it. And then they'd be like, well, it's funny. Never mind. You just don't get it. And I'd be like, no, why is it funny? I want to get the joke. I don't get it. And they'd be like, well, never mind. Like oh, come on. Like I was just making a joke. And that is a microaggression, right? Which is the joke is that I'm an idiot because I'm a woman working at this restaurant. And I responded by being like, I don't think it's funny, right? More or less. And they were like, you're just too sensitive. You just don't get it, right? Which is like the typical kind of response, I think, to microaggressions often.
I think microaggressions too get, like I said, like brushed under the rug. Like if it's not something that's pointed out, it's because it's something that I think we all have this experience as humans that other people see the world the way we do. And if they don't, they're weird, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, we all know we're all a little different in some ways, but there's some universal truths that we all kind of hold on to. And a lot of these are driven by media bias or, just generally accepted societal biases, right? And so you just assume, well, like
you get it.
You get it. And it's like, so we'll say things or we'll make comments and we don't think it's a big deal because it's like, well, obviously we all know that, but that's not reality for a lot of people. And sometimes I think oftentimes people don't even know that microaggressions have been done to them, like I mentioned, weight being one for me.
Right.
And once I have started like paying more attention and like I can hear things and people say things and I'm like, oh, that's what that is. It's a microaggression. And 9 times out of 10, nobody means anything by it. It's just this generally accepted idea that like, well, obviously we all know, like we're all on the same page. Like,
right. And it gets really dicey when you're in a workplace because you have to be sensitive and careful because a workplace isn't like your home. It's not like your social groups, right? Like this is a place that is shared between you and all the other employees that work there. And everybody deserves to feel safe at their workplace. And when I say safe, I'm not talking about, physical safety. I'm talking about emotional safety to a degree. And in an ideal world, we'd all feel safe all the time. But there should be a level of, I can come into work and know that I'm not going to be marginalized or harassed or, condescended to based on things that are out of my control.
Right.
So let's kind of break apart what a microaggression at work would look like. We've got a couple of examples from our blog post that really deal with kind of racial and cultural microaggressions. But Shannon, feel free to chime in if you have anything else that you'd want to add. I think one of the most, first of all, I think it's important to keep an open mind what might be offensive or hurtful or insensitive to somebody else. Because again, like Shannon was saying, I've got one sense of humor, right? Like I can take a lot. You can be whatever, pretty insulting to me and not insulting, that's not the right word. I have a long fuse for humor. However, again, I don't have the same lived experience as somebody who might be in a minority.
Yeah.
And so you have to be careful about like who you're making comments to.
Right.
And a good rule of thumb is like, maybe don't make them at all at the workplace.
It's tough because, people get very defensive and very sensitive when we talk about this kind of things. And that is totally justifiable. Somebody saying like, hey, this maybe wasn't great. And it's like, well, I didn't do that. I didn't mean that. Well, I guess I can't say anything at all.
Right.
And I think that is a slippery slope because there are some things where it's like, maybe don't make comments about that
specific thing.
And that can be really hard. I mean, we've seen it like with the Me Too movement too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like with men are just
guess I can't do
men in
anything.
general. I don't mean all men, but men in general, like, well, I guess I just can't say anything. I guess I can't do anything. It's like, well, no, don't call me darling.
Just like the workplace.
Yeah,
like, the bar is not that high.
So we get it. It's a slippery slope and it's tricky. And all this to say is this is, I feel like, just about introducing the concept and maybe start paying attention to yourself or to other people. And you may start seeing some of these things happen. Yeah. This isn't to say, don't say anything ever.
Right.
Don't ever, we still want people to be able to be themselves, but it's just kind of, like Grace said, awareness. Yeah. I think is key.
Yeah. So an example of microaggression at work is, and I think this one's pretty common for people of color, is talking about other people's hair.
Yeah.
This one is something that I know I've done in the past when I was much younger. There was a black girl in my class and she had beautiful hair. And I said the dreaded, can I touch it? And we were like 12, and she was like, sure. But I remember her response to me now in hindsight was like this tired, like, sure, like, here's another white person who wants to touch my hair because it's different. And what I didn't realize in that exchange is that when I asked this woman, or this girl, she was a girl at the time, to touch her hair, what I was insinuating was, you're different than me. Mm-hmm. You're different, and I'm going to point out how different you are, and then I'm going to, not take advantage of, but I'm going to use that differentness for my own sort of curiosity.
Right.
And to me, it's akin to when you go to a zoo and you're like, ooh, different. This is cool and cool. And
I think we've all heard the term exotic.
Yes.
And I think oftentimes people use that term because to describe a thing or a place or a culture that is like, oh, it's so foreign. It's so different.
It's exotic. Yeah.
And so it's the same thing when you were describing, can I touch it?
Yeah.
That's treating something as if it is wholeheartedly something for you
different.
To be explored.
And also something that doesn't belong, right? One of these things is not like the others. What I was doing there inadvertently was calling attention to her otherness. And, I can't I don't know what this person was thinking at the time. We were all kids, but I see now as an adult, and this happens with adults. You grow out of it, you hope. Right. But I know that this happens a lot of times with adults with little kids and just people who don't know better will say, oh, wow, you have such beautiful hair. Can I touch it? Or even just, wow, you have such beautiful hair is a common, that's not I wouldn't say you can't compliment people's hair, but I would say be cognizant of the tone of your compliment. Sure. Again, the word exotic when ascribed to people, I think is getting a little more dicey because it's just the implication is, you don't belong here.
Right.
You must be from far away.
It's out of the natural state of things.
I always think about the moment, it's one of the first couple episodes of Parks and Rec where I can't remember, I think it's Leslie Knope who's asking Tom Haverford, who's played by Aziz Ansari. She's like, where are you from? And he's like, South Carolina. And she's like, but where are you really from? And he's like, South Carolina. And she goes, but where are your parents from? And he goes, South Carolina.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a good example of how we as human beings are I want to know, I want to connect. You're different. I want to comment on how different you are, and then kind of maybe virtue signal that oh, I love your differences and they make us beautiful. But what you're doing is saying you're not from here, or you're different.
Well, and I think we're going to talk about this through the professional lens, right? If you have become very close with someone,
right,
and you have gotten to the point where you really want to know more about them on a deeper level, that is a whole different ballgame.
Sure.
That is not appropriate at work with your coworkers that you are not on a deeper level with, and that you probably maybe. I don't know. I don't want to say that you shouldn't. I mean, for instance, Grace and I are really close, but you have to be very cautious of that.
Aware.
Because again, it's what is the level of approach? We've talked about this before, what to and what not to talk about at work, right?
Yeah.
And so hey, where are you from? Literally just out of hey, Grace, where are you from? Is one thing. Where are you from? Because it's this exotic.
Where are your people from?
Different
yeah, again, it's the word exotic.
Or or you have some wow, really cool, interesting background. If somebody hasn't offered that up to you, it's none of your business.
Yeah.
And don't just assume that there's something there that it's there for you to find out for your entertainment and your enjoyment.
And I would say if you make the gaffe and you realize at a beat late, where are you from? And then you're like, oh man, I shouldn't have said that. And they say, South Carolina.
Yeah, leave it. Like, cool.
They are signaling.
I love Charlotte.
Yes, they are signaling. That is all I want to talk about.
Is that in South Carolina?
That's Charlotte, North Carolina.
Oh, it's
okay.
a different
it's a Carolina.
I'm sorry, Carolinas.
The Standard Office Procedures podcast is presented by Blue Summit Supplies. We're an online office supply store that puts you at the forefront of our focus by offering new career-building resources every single week. Sign up for our newsletter and visit our blog at bluesummitsupplies.com for free downloads, tools, and tips to make your job easier and more fun.
So another thing I was going to mention about hair, there's natural hairstyles.
Right.
And then there are, I don't know, what's the right word I'm looking for?
I don't know.
Where women will wear their hair. I know. God, I feel like we're going to have to cut this. But like women wear their hair naturally where it's curly.
Right.
Or women will straighten their hair where it's straight.
Like
or where, relaxed or whatever. And so I think sometimes this is something that
You're talking about women of color.
Yes, I'm talking about women of color specifically. And I'm sorry, that's what I meant by natural hair.
I was like, that's okay. I gotcha.
So I think one thing that I know someone has told me in the past and something that I have experienced is where they will get tons of compliments on their straightened, relaxed hair because, that looks like me. Mm-hmm. That looks like me
it looks like the Western ideal of beauty.
The westernized ideal.
We're really going to talk about in a moment when we talk about names. That's a big part too, is that like I want to say, we are in the West, right? Mm-hmm. And so there is a level of, it's human nature to stereotype people, like our brains, I don't mean like you should stereotype people, it's great, but I mean like that's what our brains do is we put people in boxes because it's how we process information and it's how we understand things. And it's also human nature that when you see somebody who looks like you think, oh, I know this person, right? There's a level of like instant kind of trust and like you feel a little more safe with the person who looks like you, which is why things like representation are so important in media because it's important to have all kinds of different people represented in all kinds of roles so that you can break out of the, more harmful stereotypes. But that being said, I think that the point that you're making is that sometimes we take it too far, where we have this westernized ideal of beauty, which is, like the petite, thin white lady with blonde hair and blue eyes and a pert little nose.
Right.
And anything that's different from that is less desirable.
Right.
And so people who don't automatically look like that, if they do something that gets them a little bit closer to that ideal, then we're all like, ooh, amazing.
And it's rewarded. Yes. Like you feel like you're rewarding that person with like, oh, wow, I'm going to shower you with compliments because I think this looks so great. But like, are you showering them with compliments because they're your friend and you think it looks great? Or are you doing it because now they look more like you think they should look?
Like that ideal. Yeah.
Like that ideal.
And it makes you more comfortable because
so now
you're like,
that I have totally butchered this,
you
do you feel like I made the point?
No, I think you did a really good job. And if you don't mind, I don't want to embarrass you, but I want to bring up the comment you made at your party this weekend that you alluded to, which I think is a good example of what you're describing. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I mentioned weight. So this is something, weight stigma, and intuitive eating and health at every size is something that I've really been exploring over the last couple of years. And one of the big things that I have learned out of this is basically commenting on someone's body in any shape or form is really not appropriate. I can be like, oh, I like your outfit. I think you look great. But saying like, oh man, that's really flattering on you, or like, wow, like you've lost weight or whatever, or you've gained weight, which
please don't say it to me.
Please don't comment on that ever.
Talk about it.
But I have been really trying hard to change the way that I compliment my friends and family on the way that I think that they look to be something that is much more general acceptable rather than to their body, right? And a friend of mine at this party we went to was standing right next to me and I hadn't seen her in a while. And in my head, I was like, wow, she looks really thin. And so I was like, wow, you look really skinny. And she was like, thanks. And immediately I was like, oh no, I should not have done that. Because like, I don't know what she's going through. I don't know maybe why she has lost weight. Maybe it's a bad thing. Maybe it's a good thing. It does not matter because it is not my place to comment on. And perhaps I could be congratulating somebody for something that is not to be rewarded. Yeah. I remember I did this, it was 7 or 8 years ago, and a family friend, I was saying, oh, you've lost weight. You look great. And she was like, thank you. Getting divorced and being severely depressed and not eating for 6 months will do that to you. And I was like, oh, my bad. Yikes, But so again, it's just not appropriate.
Well, and it's what you were describing a moment ago, which is like you saw that she was thinner, and we have this unattainable ideal in our minds in the West that it's like the thinner you are, the more value you have. And so when somebody gets thinner, we automatically think they're doing it. They're doing a good job because we all have this shared unhealthy ideal.
Yeah.
And so I do think that like that slip up that you described is completely understandable. I think we've all done similar things. But the point that you're making is really an important one because I think I can be pretty candid about this. It's not super embarrassing, but like I struggle with eating disorders.
Sure.
I have my whole life or disordered eating. I prefer to call it. I think it's a little more
like disordered
palatable.
eating.
And so I have my whole life. And so there's a period, I knew you then, after my divorce and after, a death in my family where I got very thin and people were like, you look so skinny. And I freaking loved it. I was like, yeah, I look so skinny. And it made me want to get skinnier and skinnier. And then one person was like, you look too skinny. And I was like, I'm happy now. If I look too skinny, I'm content. And then I went to a therapist and she was like, your brain is broken. But like the thing about it was all these people were being, it's just like you're describing where it's like, it was a compliment. They were being genuinely like, wow, good for you. You never know. You think maybe they're working out, maybe they're eating better, whatever. But it was making me worse. Like it was feeding this very unhealthy need because it was a control thing where I was like, I want to be the skinniest version of me because people are giving me all this praise and I crave it. And if I keep getting skinnier, I'll keep getting praise and it's super unhealthy. And so that's just one kind of example of, and again, like if you're moving through the world and you're just bopping along, complimenting your friends, I'm not expecting you to hold the weight of everybody's individual journey in your mind.
Particularly not with people you're very comfortable with. That is for y'all to figure out.
If you tell me I look skinny, Shannon, I would not be mad. I would love it. I love it when you do. But anyway, all that to be said, like I'm not saying, make sure you're cognizant of everybody's struggle all the time, but it's a little bit more like there are ways that your words can impact that you might not have thought of.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a good example. The hair thing, the weight thing is really important.
I feel like every single one of these that we're going to talk about is its own 10-part episode.
Yes, it really